Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jeff, Kyle, Jennifer. That was beautiful. All right, what do we got here? We need some slides. Hey, I just like to start things off with a slide like this. Education is the ability to listen to almost anything without losing your temper or your self-confidence. And I think in the year 2026, I feel like this should be tattooed on everyone's hand, just to, because I think there's a lot of things out there that maybe affect our temper or self-confidence, or maybe that's just me, but I'm a fan of that quote. All right, so we're going to talk about faith, doubt, and data today. So a little bit about me. Jeff kind of covered this a little bit, but I'm a Californian. I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I don't know why I share this, but I first got online in 1987. So even though I'm a Gen X, I'm in my 50s, I grew up online, which I think that shaped a lot of how I think about the world. I was being online for a very, very long time. I served a mission in Boston. I'm married. I've got 2 kids, and my wife reminds me hey, don't forget our daughter-in-law. So I've got one of those. And I studied at Berkeley. I studied computer science. I did tech startups, and I've got a lot of hobbies. Okay, so the B.H. Roberts Foundation, really quick. I've been doing this for about 5 years. I got out of tech, and the B.H. Roberts Foundation is just something I do now. And we do a lot of research, and our objective is sort of generic, right? We just want to help people, stay in the church and align themselves with the gospel. But how we do that is there's lots of ways to do that. But what I thought was really important, I think I can best explain with this little cartoon here. So this says members with genuine questions and concerns. They're in the water there. A teacher, a bishop, a stake president, or a family member reaches out, gives them a high five and says, just read your scriptures and pray about it. And then they drown. So I kind of feel like, and this isn't to undermine good stake presidents and bishops and family and friends, but it's hard sometimes when you feel like you're underwater in the gospel and in life, and someone just says, hey, read and pray. And they're not wrong, right? Reading and praying is always good. It is always good, but sometimes there's blocks in the road that you need help getting the road clear for you. So what I've done at the B.H. Roberts Foundation is I've decided for particular types of roadblocks to see if I could help with that. So we built an archive of about 14,000 primary source records. We have questions and answers, over 1,200 questions and answers on 83 different topics in the gospel. And the topics are things you don't talk about in Sunday school mostly. Things like Isaiah and the Book of Mormon, or slavery in Utah, LDS and LGBTQ suicide rates, race in the Book of Mormon, church finances and the SEC fine, the Kinderhook plates, black saints and the priesthood, Joseph Smith and polygamy or polyandry, changes in the temple endowment. So there are over 1,000 questions and answers based on primary source data here. And again, this is generally, most of these topics, I say generally, are not terribly important. But to some people, it's like a rock in their shoe along their journey, and it eventually will drive them nuts, and sometimes they just need to stop and take their shoe off and get that rock out of there. And so that's what a lot of our research is about. Okay, so anyway, that's just to give you a background of kind of what I do. And now we're going to talk about sort of the big picture about data and disaffiliation with the church. And I want to give some background about what's happening in our world. This is the Pride cycle. We're familiar with the Pride cycle. If you don't know where we are, we're kind of peace and prosperity, but we're definitely also in pride and wickedness. We haven't quite gotten to sorrow and destruction, but we're starting to get there. Let me show you where the world is. This is the data part. There's going to be some charts here. So this is a graph that graphs. It shows countries and their understanding of God and whether or not they believe religion is important, and also their GDP. So up in the top left there, these are poor and religious nations. Okay, and there's a clustering there. And right here are rich and non-believing nations. And it's interesting, in the Book of Mormon, we have this theme about, hey, the pride cycle. And here we see the data in our world matches that exactly. If you're poor, you're humble. And if you're rich, you're proud. Now, what's interesting about this is the outlier. See, that's the United States right there. And we're different. We're exceptional, I guess, in this way, in that we are incredibly wealthy, but we're also somewhat believing, which really sets us apart from all the other wealthy nations on the earth. I think that's a good thing. However, here's the problem. That's where we're going. And this data is a few years old, and sure enough, yeah, see that blue dot? That's where we actually are today. And we're going to keep going that direction, unfortunately. I wish we weren't, but that's where we're headed. That's kind of the way things go. Here, this is the percent of respondents that said religion is not important in their life. This has been going up. This is from starting in around 2000 up to today. So over a third of Americans say religion is not important in their life. So the data supports the previous graph where people don't really care about religion as much anymore. Confidence in religious institutions is going down. This is from 1974 up to today. So it's the lowest it's been in 50 years. People just don't believe in churches. People don't believe in institutions in general today, but especially religious institutions. You can see this. This is a graph that shows the membership of the 6 largest mainline Protestant denominations. It was up around 22 million back in the 90s, and it's dropped. About 1 in 3 people have left the mainline religions. So this is phenomenal. This is an incredible. This is incredible what we're seeing here is people leaving religion. Now, we're not so different. This is the growth rate of our church. The blue line just shows the annual growth rate. What happened around 1990s, 2000, something changed, and our growth rate started to decline. Now, in absolute terms, we're bigger than we've ever been. And most of that, people say, well, we have a lot of kids. Yeah, that's true. But actually, the growth rate is all from convert baptisms. And we continue to grow as a church. But the growth rate is decreasing, if that makes sense. So when we think about disaffiliation in the church, the first thing that comes to my mind is the tree of life sort of metaphor in the Book of Mormon. And over here on the left, of course, we have the iron rod. We have the big shiny tree. On the right, we have all the people making fun of the people that are on the path. But what I want to talk about these folks in the middle here. Because that's, I think all of us, well, maybe I'll speak for myself. Sometimes I feel like I'm not quite on the path, and I'm sort of curious and interested what's going on over there. These folks, you'll notice some of them have the fruit in their hands. And they're like, maybe that's not it. This guy down here, he's looking back at the iron rod saying, maybe I've made a mistake. This guy's like, hey, I think you have better music than we do. I don't know what's going on in their heads, but there's something going on there that's interesting. So what we did at the B.H. Roberts Foundation is we said, well, we want to find out about what's going on in this picture, mostly on the left side of that chasm. We want to find out about our people. So how do you do that? If you're a data guy, you go get data. So in 2023, we sent out about 80,000 postcards, and we did the largest statistical survey of Latter-day Saints that's ever been done in history. In 2011, Pew did one. They got about 1,000 respondents. Jana Reese did one in 2016. She got about 1,700 respondents, and we got 3,800 respondents. And that might not seem like a lot, but it is really hard. There's just not a lot of Mormons out there, guys, and it's really hard to get a hold of them. And so you have to just cover a lot of ground to try to get representative, good data. You can post something on Facebook and say, hey, take my survey, but statistically that's garbage data. That's not useful. You have to get something that's statistically robust, and that's a lot of work. So yeah, we sent out mailers, and then we did advertisement, and then we took the advertisements that are randomized and compared them with the mailers, did some math, and got some really good data. I'm going to share that data with you. But before we do that, a lot of people ask when I talk about data, they say, well, do you know why people leave the church? And this is what I tell them. I say, well, people are 6 times more likely to blame their ex-spouse than themselves for divorce. And this is well understood in psychology and sociology. And because of that, I say, nope, no one will ever know. You cannot get good data. It's like going to people that have been divorced and saying, whose fault was it? And people cannot help themselves. They will always be biased in that way. So it's really hard. Here's an example, right? Did you leave the church because you wanted weekends off and a 10% raise? You can ask people that, and they're going to be like, of course not. I left the church because the church has some problematic history and policies, and I'm intellectually honest, and I have integrity. It's like, I don't know why, but it's really hard to get, and sometimes they don't even know themselves exactly, so it's really hard. So I wanted to get that out of the way. We're still going to talk about this, but it's really hard to get good data on that. So if you do hear, hey, there's a survey, and we know why, no, they don't. Just proceed with caution. All right, let's talk about demographics, though. We did learn some things about demographics that are really interesting. Former Latter-day Saints are, for the most part, demographically similar to current Latter-day Saints. Generally speaking, I'll share some differences, but they're just like us. Belief in God, this is interesting. About half of former Latter-day Saints don't believe in God, or they're agnostic to the point where they think it's impossible to know if there really is a God. So that's a large amount. The good news, though, I think it's good news, is 1/3 of them still believe in God. So it's really nice. That's good. It's a good first step there. Prayer. Let's talk about prayer. So 1 in 4 Latter-day Saints that used to be in the church, they pray at least once a week. That brings me some comfort. That's nice to know. And by the way, the reason this is important is because all of us have friends or family, people we love, that have stepped away from the church. And that's why it's important. It's why it's important to me, and I think why people care about this information is because we want to know about this part of our family, our community, that's stepped away right now. We just want to understand. We want to learn more. Religious affiliation, about 90% of them are in the nones category, so that means they just don't have any religious affiliation at all. This is really different than a lot of other faiths. If you're a Baptist or a Methodist, and if you left that faith, a lot of times you'll become a Catholic or something. That's just not true in our community. When people leave the Latter-day Saint faith, they just drop religion altogether. Sentiment towards the church. So about 75% of former Latter-day Saints dislike or strongly dislike the church. So that's kind of sad, not surprising. I'm sure you felt some heat before, or maybe you felt some heat yourself around the institution. However, when you talk about members of the church, they have a neutral to positive feeling towards the people in the church. So that's nice. That's good to know. This might be relevant to the conference here. We asked them about LGBTQ issues. Former Latter-day Saints are over 4 times more likely to identify as LGBTQ+ than Latter-day Saints, and twice as likely as the general population. There's a lot going on in there. Now, this is important to understand. I don't know why. All we do is we get the data. Explaining why something is in the data is much, much more difficult, and it is beyond the scope of the process of gathering this data. But this is really strong, fascinating data here. Let's talk about marriage. About 1 in 5 former Latter-day Saints are married to a believing member of the church. That's a difficult journey. Former Latter-day Saints are more than twice more likely to be divorced than current Latter-day Saints. So again, don't know, I can't explain why that is. This is just the data. So there's just a correlation. So if you are a former Latter-day Saint, it's much more likely that you have been divorced. And former Latter-day Saints are 4 times more or less likely to have been married or sealed in the temple. Again, I can't say one causes something. I can just say there's a correlation there. So if you're married and sealed in the temple, there's a correlation with staying in the church. All right, children. Former Latter-day Saints have almost 1 less child than Latter-day Saints. So that's 2.5 to about 3.4 children. I again, can't tell you why. Former Latter-day Saints don't like kids. No, you can't say that. It's a terrible thing. I shouldn't have said that. Okay. All right, let's talk about, but what are the reasons for disengagement here? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Great Divorce. Who's read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis? Oh yeah, we've got some fans out there. I love the concept. I don't like how it's written. It's hard to read. I don't know, maybe that's just a me problem. But I love the book. I love the parable, the allegory in there. So people leave for family reasons, doctrinal, historical, policy reasons, social or community reasons, guilt or shame, embarrassment, or they simply do a cost-benefit analysis. I think, I'll speak for myself, I can relate to all of these, right? Being a Latter-day Saint and being part of the community and part of the faith, there's friction related to all these things. So the friction is real, right? It's how we deal with that difference, I think. So, for example, here are some ideas here. I'm sick and tired of my hypocritical parents. Maybe you hear a former Latter-day Saint say that. Or, what does it say? I can't believe the church sided with a political party that I hate. What's up with that, right? Or, I just sold my company for $50 million. Do I really believe in tithing? My new friends think my church is greedy and bigoted. Maybe they're right. Or this one. What does that say? You get old, you can't see. What did that say? On that side, is it easier? I love my boyfriend, and I want to move in with him. Come on. I mean, you love your boyfriend, you want to move in. How can that compete with the church? Or my son came out as gay, and I have to choose between him and the church. It's a false dichotomy, but we hear that, right? I think that, in my work with the B.H. Roberts Foundation, I think the most powerful way to explain disaffiliation is through what are called worldview stories. Jeffrey Thain is a faculty member at BYU Idaho. He's spoken on this, and I love the work he's done here. What is a worldview? A worldview tells us what we should love or despise, what is valuable or unimportant, and what is good or evil. They're stories we tell ourselves, and we all do it. We all have stories. Usually we're the hero of the story, of our own story. And that's good. I think that's healthy. But here, I'll give you an example. Star Wars. We've all seen Star Wars, right? What is this story about? Well, what the story is about depends on your worldview. I'm going to share a story with you from a particular worldview. This is a story about an orphan farm boy that is radicalized after a military strike kills his family. He's indoctrinated into a religious cult and joins a group of insurgents on a terrorist attack that kills hundreds of thousands of people. Now, if you've seen the movie, there is nothing technically inaccurate in that narrative. However, I think most of us are going to think, well, that's nuts. That's not the story at all. That is a completely crazy way to think about Star Wars. Well, it's a worldview. It's someone who sees through a particular lens. Say they're part of the empire and they were raised in the empire. They're going to say, yeah, that's exactly who Luke Skywalker is. And they would have a very different way of living and thinking about the Rebel Alliance. Let me share some other worldviews. There's like a consumerism worldview. And by the way, these worldviews, we're not all mono worldview, right? We all have different lenses that we put on at different times, okay? So the consumerism worldview in our story are characters' aspirations. We want material comfort and enjoyment. Who doesn't want that, right? I think we all want that. The conflict in our story is, we don't have enough money, right? The villains are poverty, unemployment, economic inequality. I think that's fair. Those are not good things, right? Human flourishing. What's the good life in our story? Material consumption, economic prosperity. And what's the solution to problems? Well, lucrative employment or investments. If you look at the world through this lens, every story you read in the news, every time you talk to your friends, everything you see is going to be kind of through this way of thinking. And again, I'm not saying this is bad or good. It's just a particular way of looking through the world. Expressive individualism, this worldview, right? So live an authentic life, become our truest self. Judgment and oppression against us is the conflict that we're fighting here. The villains, outdated social norms that make us feel judged. Human flourishing, living in communities that celebrate authentic living without judgment. And the solution to the problem is to fight, to break free of old stifling social norms, right? If this is the only lens you see the world through, this will predict most of your behavior, most of the way you see the world and how you act and things you say and how you interpret things that you encounter. The restored gospel, there's a worldview for this, and there's dozens of worldviews. And like I said, we're not exclusive to any one of them. We have little bits and pieces of all of them in our lives. But it's good to be conscientious of what worldview we are applying in our lives. So the aspiration here is salvation, exaltation with God. That's the goal, right? The central conflict is separation from God through sin and death. It's like basic Sunday school stuff here. The villains, sin, vice, the adversary. What's the good life? Well, the fruits of the Spirit. Joy, brotherhood, and sisterhood, becoming what God wants us to be. That's what we're trying to do. And the solution to the problem is redemption through Christ by making and keeping covenants. So this seems like a good lens, right? But again, it's really hard to always have this lens. Right? But I think every Sunday we're reminded, hey, this is a real lens. And this is a good lens, too. I think this lens is the clearest of all lenses. But what happens, here's an example of what people think about, depending on the lens they have about the church, right? So I'm going to try reading this. What is the church? The church is a multinational, multi-billion-dollar corporation run by an oligarchy of old white men who exert control over millions of members of its organization through spiritual manipulation of promises of celestial glory or threats of damnation. All the while continue to oppress sexual minorities and women and providing the bare minimum in actual charity to the needy. That might sound familiar to some of you because maybe you've heard it. Maybe you've said it. I don't know. But if someone has maybe an expressive individualism and secular humanism worldview, they're going to say, yeah, that's exactly what the church is. Someone that has a restored gospel lens, they're going to say, this is a complete and utter distortion. This is like saying Luke Skywalker is a radicalized religious zealot that murders people. That's how they're going to see the world. And there's two different things. Is this technically correct? You can make an argument. But it's a particular way of seeing the world. This here, another way of seeing it is a global organization that is focused on helping people make and keep sacred covenants with God. So a restored gospel lens will say, yeah, that's exactly what the church is about. These folks might say, well, that's not true. This is nonsense. They're both seeing the same picture, but they see it very differently because of their worldview. Okay, so if someone is that we're concerned about is having trouble with the church, they're going to look at the tree of life allegory, and they're not going to see this. They're not going to say, oh yeah, I have two choices. I can stay on the straight and narrow path, or I can be with those people in the great and spacious building. They do not see this at all, right? This is what they see. They're like, hey, that's not so bad. Ellen's kind of funny. Jimmy Fallon's not so bad. And I'm not representing, well, they're the world, okay? I'm not saying they're bad. They're just, that's pretty mainstream. Over here, they see a bunch of white guys that are supporting Trump, that are into money. Like, they might see this, right? And so when you say, hey, come back to the church, they're like, no. Why the heck would I? No, that's not who I am. Again, it all has to do with how they see the world. So what's another way to think about our relationship with the church? The metaphor of marriage. It's a covenant relationship. So we see this over and over again in the scriptures, right? Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ has loved the church. Turn, O backsliding children, saith the Lord, for I am married unto you. The marriage of the lambs is come, and his wife hath made herself ready. So this is over and over and over in the scriptures. So I'm going to talk about the Gottman ratio. So how do you keep a marriage healthy? Well, some people have done some interesting work on this. John Gottman, he was at the University of Washington, and what he did is he did some fascinating research. He interviewed 79 married couples that had been married for 5 years, and 14 years later, he went back and he found that his prediction of who was going to be divorced was 93% accurate. He only talked to them for about 15 minutes. So he sat down with these couples, said, let's just talk for a little bit. And then he's just like, yep, they're doomed, you know. And he was right 93% of the time. Then he repeated the experiment, right? He did this with newlyweds, 130 newlyweds. 6 years later, his accuracy was 83%. Now, and this has actually been repeated many times. The methodology, it's repeatable and it's sound. Ironically, John Gottman's been divorced twice, but that happens, doesn't it? We're like, oh yeah, I'm an expert in this thing, but I can't see it in myself. But anyway, but maybe he predicted it. I don't know. So, okay, so what he did is he wanted to observe how they talk to each other. How does he predict? All he did is just say, how do they talk to each other? And what he discovered, there's 4 characteristics, and if you can detect this in a simple conversation about nothing, and I've seen some of the work where he basically just says, well, talk about how your day went. Talk about how your week went. There wasn't a particular topic. He just wanted to see how they interact with each other. The 4 horsemen of the relationship apocalypse are criticism, right? And that's, I have negative things to say about you. Contempt is, I'm better than you. And that leads to defensiveness. Well, whatever it is, it's not my fault. And finally, stonewalling. I'm disengaging from you. I'm not having this conversation. I'm separating myself. If you have these 4 things in your relationship is not going to work out. And of course, any of us that's been in any kind of relationship, not just marriage, any relationship, we've probably done all this, right? This is a very normal human behavior here. But if this is repeated over and over, if this is characteristic of your typical engagement with the person you have a relationship with, then that relationship will not last. Now, the Gottman ratio, you may have heard about the Gottman ratio. It's basically the ratio of positive to negative things that come up in a conversation. You know, how often do those 4 negative characteristics come up compared to positive ones? So once you get into negative Gottman ratio territory, where most of your interactions are very negative, you lose trust. And so for example, say your spouse is like, look, I I brought some ice cream and frozen peas. I don't know what she's got there, but look, I baked you some cookies. If you have a negative Gottman ratio, you're going to say, okay, what do you want? Hey, I finally fixed the sink. Okay, what did you do wrong? Right? You start to suspect everything that the partner in the relationship is doing because you're in that negative Gottman ratio space. So an example with the church, right? Some great headlines about the church is doing great work, right, all over the world. If someone has a negative Gottman ratio, the church should be ashamed of itself bragging about its paltry contribution. Shame on you. I mean, that's a real comment from, you can guess which newspaper. But yeah, we see this all the time. Any positive thing that the church does, it doesn't matter what it is, negative Gottman ratio. And again, that comes up. All of us in our relationship with the church, I think, can relate to the friction related to these things. So why do we stay? Right? Why do people stay in relationships if they do have friction? Well, this is something interesting that Gottman learned, is that nearly 2/3 of happy couples, not just couples that stay, but happy couples, still have the very same unresolved conflicts after 10 years. Yet they remain happy because they learn to work around the issue. Happy couples, it's not like they're like, oh yeah, my issue list is empty. Like, that's not a real thing. That's fake. Everyone can whip out, yeah, these are my problems with my relationship, with my spouse, with my mother, with my father, with the church, with my siblings. I mean, we all have the list. Why do we stay? We figure out how to make it work because we're committed to the relationship. And that's the difference. And having a positive Gottman ratio, I don't know if that's a cause or a symptom or maybe a little bit of both, but yeah, if we can stay away from those four horsemen of negativity and shift our worldview, I think we have a chance to stay. Now, what do we do with people that we love that maybe are having trouble here? This is a quick quote from President Russell Ballard. He says, if I have family or friends who are less active, how far do I go in my attempts to bring them back? Please do not preach to them. Your family member or friends already know the church's teachings. They don't need another lecture. What they all need is love and understanding, not judging. Now, the way I translate that is positive Gottman ratio, right? You don't have to talk to them about the church. Just nurture that relationship and try to have the number of positive interactions with you as someone who represents maybe the church in their mind to be positive. Just work on that. That could take years and years and years. We have to be patient. Now, let me wrap up with sharing one metaphor. How much time do we got? Am I okay on time? Cool. All right. Who knows what a Rupert drop is? Anyone? Oh, look, we've got 7 nerds in the audience. Okay, a Rupert drop it was discovered in the 17th century by this English guy named Prince Rupert. And Prince Rupert was in the Netherlands, and he spent some time with some glass blowers. And what he discovered is that these guys from the Netherlands, if you drop molten glass in water, it formed these really pretty drops. But they had a really fascinating principle, a characteristic of these drops. Look, we're shooting a gun at a piece of glass, and the bullet shatters. These glass drops are incredibly hard. You can smash them with hammers. You can put them in hydraulic presses. They will not break. They have this fascinating characteristic. They're bulletproof, literally. But they have one weakness. See the little stem there? Right there. If you just take your finger and snap that stem, they will explode. It will shatter into millions and millions of pieces. Oh, there's a little slow-mo of it right there, boom. Yeah. It's amazing, right? On the one hand, it's bulletproof. On the other hand, just a little prick the whole thing explodes. So, how does this relate to us? Well, I mean, maybe you grew up in the church, you served a mission, you got married in the temple, you have a bunch of kids, you're in the bishopric. I am rock solid. Nothing can take me away from the gospel. Well, then we find out you've left the church. Or you have a brother-in-law, and that's their story. Or you have a sister, and that's their story. And you think, what happened? They were so solid. And now they're out of the church, and gosh, they resent the church. And they resent me. Well, I think the chances are high they were a Rupert drop. You know? They had real strength, but there's a weakness. And it doesn't take much. One little snap, and boom. So how do we avoid this, right? It's a little scary if you think, oh, I'm a ticking time bomb. If someone just pricks me in the right way, I'll explode. Don't be a Rupert drop, be a tree. Be a tree. So we put our roots deep, and this tree is permanently disfigured, right? If you've ever seen trees on some windy shores, they're always bent like this. That's okay. You don't have to be a picture-perfect tree. None of us are. Well, some of us might be, but not me. Probably not you guys, right? We're all messed up looking. That's okay. There's no requirement to be this big, beautiful, straight tree, right? What we need are deep, healthy roots, right? And anything in our life that comes by, that's okay. We can be flexible. We can bend, right? If we hold on to parts of the gospel that we think should be this way or ought to be that way, and maybe the church, makes an announcement or does something else, or we discover some bit of history that bothers us, boom, Rupert drop. No. Just be flexible. Just go with it, right? Because we don't know. There's so much we just don't know. And I know that's not satisfying. Someone who collects 14,000 records, primary source records, is probably not the kind of person that's like, oh, I'm not worried about that. No, got a little obsessive, right? I wanted to know. I wanted to know what's the bare metal truth? What do we have? And what did I discover? We've got lots and lots of pieces of the puzzle, but we don't have the whole picture. And that's okay. I just wanted to, count up all the puzzle pieces. Just someone figured someone had to do it, and so why not me? But what really matters is my testimony of Jesus Christ and the gospel. Those are the roots. And that sometimes we forget to nurture that, because watering and fertilizing is, repetitive and boring sometimes. But that's the job. That's what we got to do. All right. So what have we talked about today? There's data and answers to many difficult questions in the church. Not all of them, though. Not even close to most of them, but they're out there if you need them. And like in a marriage, people can be happy living with unresolved problems, right? Worldview is what drives belief and action. I'm telling you, that's it. That's really, if you feel like your worldview is driving you towards something that isn't God, maybe do some course correction. Do some, change up your lenses a little bit. De-emphasize this lens, emphasize this other lens. You don't have to be 100%, but just be aware of the lens you use. People that leave the church radically change their worldview. This is something else in the data. We did a lot of analysis on what people that have left the church believe, and they changed their worldview. And again, I don't know causation or correlation, but it's the worldview that changes. Care for your roots. Be flexible with your branches. It's okay to be flexible with the branches. Finally, let me just end with Matthew 18:14. Even so, It is not the will of your Father which is in heaven that one of these little ones should perish. For the Son of Man has come to save that which was lost. That gives me hope. I love God, Jesus Christ, and the gospel, and the church. And I leave this with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.